we all have maturing to do through our lives. We all, again, make mistakes. It's okay. But you have to be willing to go the extra mile and prove to them that you are now different, that you do have better study skills now, that you are now able to put in the effort it takes and is required to get an A. So be sure you can show that on paper. You have to provide proof. You can't just say, I promise. Promise is only good as what the proof is in the pudding, right? You gotta make the pudding. So you gotta show them that you're capable by actually doing the work and showing them on paper that you can achieve it. Hello, future CRNA. Welcome back to CRNA School Prep Academy podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Fennell, and founder of CRNA School Prep Academy. In today's episode, we are going to kind of reveal just how competitive it is to get into CRNA school in 2024. So within CRNA School Prep Academy, we've been mentoring now coming up on 4 years, and we have mentored over 5,000 ICU nurses, many of which thousands have gone on to gain acceptance. So again, we have seen kind of a trend, and in today's episode, I'm going to kind of share just what we see as far as the trend, as far as how competitive it is, and some of the things around what makes it competitive, so you kind of can understand where it is you stand. All right, without further ado, let's get into today's episode. All right, first and foremost, as far as how competitive is it to get into CRNA school in 2024, is talking about the number of applications. The number of applications for CRNA school has been on the rise. So for example, there was a brand new program that was out west, and they reported over 500 applicants for only 34 seats. So that is incredibly competitive. And mind you, this was a new program. So very little no whereabouts as far as, didn't have a lot of marketing under their belt yet or anything like that. You would think a more established program would get that number of applicants, but this program, again, brand new, got that many applicants for a brand new cohort. That is incredibly competitive. I would say if you look at an average ballpark, some schools, yes, only get maybe like 80 to 100 applicants. Other schools can get 500, 600, 700 applicants. And so where does the fine line lay as far as what's the average school? If you look at all the schools in the country, the average school this day and age is averaging right around 200 to 250 applicants. That's the ballpark range for the average, with the high end being 600 to 700 and the low end being closer to 100. So you really, when you're considering what CRNA school to apply to, knowing that is going to help you understand just how much competition you're going to be up against. And really, unfortunately, you might not know what that application year is going to be like until it's already over. But if you're applying to a school who has a history, kind of knowing what the previous year application pool was like would be helpful, because then you can look at it, okay, the school gets 100 applicants, they take, let's just say 50 students to make math easy. So I have a 50% chance of getting in from the fact that they get 100 applicants and they take 50. That's 50-50 chance. So I don't think that actually exists. So don't get your hopes up. Usually schools that get 100 applicants tend to be schools that take very small cohorts, 8 to 10. That's not always the case, but it does seem to be the schools that get fewer applicants tend to also just be the smaller schools. Schools that get a lot of applicants tend to be schools that take a lot of students. One that comes to mind is Texas Wesleyan. They have very large cohorts. They also get a lot of applicants to that program. So again, knowing kind of the competitive nature of your program can kind of give you just an idea of what you're up against as far as odds go. If all apples were the same. However, keep in mind when we state, the school got 250 applicants, sometimes schools are only reporting 150 applicants, but maybe they got 200 applicants. Why is that different? Because they'll discredit a good chunk of applicants they felt didn't make the cut. Meaning they might have gotten applicants that quote unquote didn't even meet the minimum requirements. So they don't even consider them a true applicant. So you'll hear kind of different numbers out there, but know that, schools based on the overall application pool, there's how many applications they get versus how many they consider applications they actually need to review. So sometimes they report that number versus the overall number. So you'll say, well, I heard the school got 250 applicants. How come you heard they only got, 175? And it's maybe because they got that many unqualified applicants. They didn't even consider that in their qualified applicant pool. And so when they reported their numbers, say in an open house, it might have been lower than that because they only reported the qualified applicants, meaning ones they had to actually review. So yes, record numbers of applications. This has been kind of the trend since the pandemic hit. Really throughout time, applications have always gone up. If you look at the competitive overall nature of getting to CRNA school, you're looking at about a 15% acceptance rate. Back when even I got into CRNA school, that was 10 years ago when I graduated. So 12, 13 years ago when I was applying. Holy cow, it's like a lifetime ago. Things were looking at like the average is more like 20, 25%. We're now shifting closer to 12 to 15%. I would still say that we're sitting right around 15%, but based on some statistics you look at, it's closer to 12%. As far as the overall picture is number of total applications and total seats, as far as how many applicants these schools are getting every given year. And again, that statistics was taken from the NBCRNA when they reported this. This was back in 2020 or 2021. It was right around the pandemic. So again, I don't have the current numbers for 2023. Those will probably be shared relatively soon. But if it was that competitive when things started kind of to spike, I know it's only going to get more competitive, which means if it was 15% back then, it's probably closer to 12% now. So that's very, you can look at it two ways. You'd say, wow, that feels really depressing, Jenny. Thank you for the encouragement. Or you could just say, well, you know what? I'm going to try to be the best that I can be so I can be part of that 15%. And that's really what it's all about, is understanding what you're bringing to the table so you can stand out amongst the sea of applications. Being a part of CRNA School Prep Academy is a really great way to stand out because we essentially teach you all the little nuances you need to do to make sure that your application is, it shines. So, getting involved in different mentorship communities doesn't have to be CSPA, but just investing in yourself so you can make sure you know what to do to stand out is really going to be worth your while. It could be going to things like the ANA conferences, going to open houses, and just making sure you're actually getting your essay peer reviewed in some way. It doesn't have to be paid peer review, just be any peer review, making sure you're giving that 7, 10, 12 different edits before you just submit it. I see a lot of people kind of just wing these applications, and sometimes it works out in their favor if you're lucky and you just are gifted, I guess. I would not be gifted if that was me. It would look like doo-doo. If I just winged an application at the wall, it would look really bad. But some people do, and they are just naturally able to do that. Good for them. Pat on their back, right? But the majority of us need to put in the work. The majority of us really need to fine-tune and critique their essay and their resume. And even if you think it looks great, get someone else to look at it because you have your own blinders. We all have our own blinders. We can't always see what we need to see ourselves. That's why it requires our peers, colleagues, friends to do it for us. To say, hey, I noticed this. And you're like, who? I had no idea. And it's because we all have blind spots within our own persona, right? Of what we think who we are and what we are, what we've achieved. Maybe we're not as good as we think we are. We usually always inflate our ego, right? I mean, that's like human nature to say, oh, I've done this, this, and this, and I'm fine. When in reality, when you're looking at everyone else in the pool, you're really not as shiny as you think you are. Because everyone else is that shiny too. And so how can you outshine someone who's very shiny? You put more oil on your face, you could try that. I don't know. I mean, my face actually is kind of shiny right now. But long story short, you just have to know how to sell yourself and how to improve your weaknesses. And, people tend to want to steer towards the direction of comfort, meaning I'll take this course because I know I can do well. That's actually not the best idea. You want to steer in the other direction. Push yourself to the edge of uncomfortableness. That is where the most self-growth will occur. And it will equally show that you're willing to do work that you know is going to be difficult and hard, and you're still going to be successful. Meaning, if you have a C in chemistry in your undergrad degree, take a chemistry course. Don't take a microbiology course. I got an A in microbiology in undergrad. I'll just take another one and I know I'll get another A. No, you want to show that you've made the decision to take a course you once struggled in, and now you're able to get that A. So that's my advice for you, is to kind of steer yourself in the direction that makes you uncomfortable. That's usually where you need to go. And there's a reason why it's uncomfortable. There's a reason why you don't want to do it. And it's because you're kind of facing yourself in the mirror and you're like, oh, all right, darn it, Jenny, I guess I have to do this. I don't want to take another course, or I don't want to take the GRE, but I guess I'm going to, because that's what I know that's like the path of like uncomfortableness. That's what I feel like I don't want to do it with them. I know I need to do it. So kind of listen to that little tiny voice in your head. If you're questioning whether you should do something, it probably means you probably should be doing it. But first and foremost, before you go out and take additional courses and take the GRE and all other stuff, make sure you're investing time and energy getting to know your program, getting to know what you're up against as far as the competitive nature of your program. And if they're able to give you feedback on your transcripts, if they're able to give you some advice, make sure you're asking for it. You will never know unless you ask. And the worst response you can possibly get is either crickets or I don't have time for that. Okay, I'll just go somewhere else and find someone else that has time for it, or I'll figure out other resources. That's literally the worst case scenario. And it kind of blows my mind that people are just so afraid to ask because they don't want to hear that response. They don't want to be ghosted. They don't want to hear no. So they just don't ask. You are missing a huge opportunity. You need to ask. Again, if you don't ask, you will never get. Okay. So you can ask. It's okay. Do it politely, respectfully. Don't give them, an entire paragraph to read. Be direct to the point. I took this class. I got a C in undergrad. Is it going to be worth retaking? Here's the courses I've looked into retaking. Would you recommend any of these? Do the work. Don't make them do the work for you. Do the work. Do your own research on what you think you need to retake and what you could retake and where, and then have them pick. That way it's an easy yes or no or that, and then bye-bye. Don't give them an open-ended question where they have to then respond in a paragraph format, and that's more likely to be denied. Make it easy to answer. The easier you make your question to answer, the more likely you're going to get a response. So keep that in mind when you're reaching out to programs. Be respectful, be polite, be professional. I have shared this story before, but I'm going to share it again because it's been a while. Oh my gosh, you guys. Okay, so funny story. When I was preparing to apply to CRNA school, young little Jenny here, okay, I was also in wedding planning mode, sending out massive amounts of emails every day to wedding planners and vendors and all kinds of stuff. Not that that's really an excuse, but that's my that's my mental excuse, right? Long story short, I was in the midst of doing all that and also equally looking to what I need to apply to CRNA school. I wasn't really sure where I stood competitive wise. I'm like, well, I don't really know. Maybe I feel like I've done all the right things, but I don't know. Maybe I could do more. And so I actually reached out to the program director to see if there's anything else I can do to improve my odds of gaining acceptance, right? Kind of what I kind of teach you guys to do too. I did these things back in the day. However, for whatever reason, and I laugh now because I'm like, I can't believe I did that, but I did. This is what I did. The program director at the time was Mr. Barton, okay? And he's, no longer at the school anymore. His first name was Charles. I said, hey, Charles, can you give me advice? I mean, I still am cringe. What was I thinking? Oh my gosh. He wasn't a doctorate prepared CRNA. He literally went by Mr. Barton, but I didn't call him Mr. Barton. I said, hey, Charles, just flat out, completely disrespectful, rude, whatever you want to call it. I got a rebuttal to that email and said, how dare you address me so informally? And, I forget if he called me a millennial, Generation Z, Y, I don't remember, but he ultimately had me do a research paper on how disrespectful our generation was. So if that gives you any hope, and I got accepted into the school, by the way, and actually I think it was a 4-page paper I wrote. And after I did it and sent it to him, he was actually very thankful and told me I did a good job. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, let's get married and change my name. Which I did. I went and got married, changed my name, and went and applied and hoped that they didn't remember who the heck I was, that I was just a new person, different last name. I still to this day, honestly, at the time, I was so embarrassed about that happening. I never did bring it back up. It was kind of I let bygones be bygones, but I got into that school. And so, but I remember being crushed when I got that response, thinking I had just totally hosed any chance of me getting into this school. I am now blacklisted. And it just goes to show that it's not always the case. So don't lose hope. If you make a little screw up, own your mistake, make up for it, and move forward.
Well, hello, future CRNA. I wanted to share another daily dose of inspiration from a highlight from our community. This big shout out goes to Taylor. Congratulations on your CRNA acceptance. Thank you so very much for sharing your story. I was accepted into program, again, I don't disclose that, I wanted to thank the Academy for all the resources in this community for the support and advice. They specifically asked me about being a member of CRNA School Prep Academy in my interview and asked how I think it benefited me. This was my first year applying, and I only applied to 2 schools. I got interviews at both. I believe this program really put me ahead of other candidates and showed my determination and growth. Thank you. Thank you, Taylor. I appreciate those sweet words and your testimonial, as well as your story. It's so inspiring, and I'm so incredibly grateful to have you be a part of our community. Cheers to your future. I'm rooting for you. Let's go ahead and get back into today's show.
All right. So next on our list, how competitive is CRNA school in 2024? GPA. Ooh. Okay. So a couple years ago, I would say the GPA average was like a 3.5. It is getting higher than that now, you guys. It is more like a 3.7. And I know you're probably having a gut feeling in your stomach. No, don't go out there and take all these courses. If you're a 3.5, 3.4 even, don't go out there and sign up for all these courses. I'm not saying that, and that's not my intention with telling you this. But GPA is on the rise. Why? Because they're getting more applications. And so they're getting more and more qualified applicants who meet a very high GPA background. And so what this essentially means to you is, you can't sit still. You have to be willing to take some additional courses if your GPA is on the lower side, but not just your overall GPA. What is your science GPA? Because that's what really matters, is your core sciences. They really want to see, not that they want to see an F in art history, but an F in art history is not going to mean the same as an F in microbiology or an F in pharmacology. So if you have an F or a D or a C in a major core science, that's a huge red flag. Why? Because they want you to be successful. They don't want you to flunk out. They don't want to, rack up their attrition rate because they let in people in their program who just cannot be successful based on their track record. If they have a track record of achieving B's and C's and D's, how in the world will they ever maintain a B plus and A average in these high level science courses? It's just not realistic. So they have to be realistic with who they give an opportunity to interview and also gain acceptance. It doesn't mean that, I'm not saying that just because you have that track record means you're hosed or that you're not able to, you're not capable. Because I truly believe that if you really want something bad enough, you can do whatever you want. And I know that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you were a different person. We all were. You were that girl who said, "Hey, Charles," and again, we all have maturing to do through our lives. We all, again, make mistakes. It's okay. But you have to be willing to go the extra mile and prove to them that you are now different, that you do have better study skills now, that you are now able to put in the effort it takes and is required to get an A. So be sure you can show that on paper. You have to provide proof. You can't just say, "I promise." Promise is only good as what the proof is in the pudding, right? You gotta make the pudding. So you gotta show them that you're capable by actually doing the work and showing them on paper that you can achieve it. So GPA is on the rise as far as the average goes. Like I said, this was a couple years ago now, but when I talked to my old alma mater, they said they didn't even have to look at applications less than a 3.4. They said that they had so many applications, this was back in, I think, 2021, that they didn't even have to look at anything less than a 3.4. Like that's really alarming. But this is also a school that historically loves high GPA, meaning they put a ton of weight on a GPA. And I'm not saying not saying schools, there are some schools who don't put any weight on GPA or don't think it's important, because they all think it's really important. However, there are other programs, if you look at the overall average GPA, you'll notice it's not as high. And there's usually, because they usually tend to not put as heavy emphasis on that as maybe say emotional intelligence or, the personality that they gain in the interview, what they've actually achieved as far as ICU experience, their knowledge base, et cetera. So they're willing to let a lower GPA come into the program, knowing that they're a more holistic picture. They're a better applicant overall because they're not just all brains, right? They have some interpersonal skills too. Sometimes book people can be a little, like they're not exactly person to person kind of people. And to be a CRNA, you kind of have to be a people person. I know you put people to sleep, but you still have to interact with anesthesiologists, your surgeon, your scrub techs, your patients when you're interviewing them in the pre-op area. So even though people make a joke, "Oh, I like people under general anesthesia," we still have to have people skills, okay? And including being a part of a cohort. You are a teammate when you're a cohort. You are part of your class. You don't want to be that person in class who makes everyone's life miserable. They won't want to pick you no matter how smart you are book-wise. So keep that in mind. It's not always GPA. You can have a 4.0 and get rejected from CRNA school. I have seen it happen. In fact, I'll never forget, she reached out to me. She's like, I don't get it, Jenny. She's like, my coworker who has a lower GPA, didn't have as high a GRE score, had less ICU experience. They got in and I didn't. I don't understand why. Well, when they investigated, it turned out the interview panel felt that they were cocky. They felt like they were kind of arrogant in their interview. And she's like, oh my gosh, really? How could you ever think that about me? Like, she was shocked. But it just shows that she kind of lacked that perspective of her tone and how she came across. And there's nothing wrong about that. And you might say, oh, that's unfair. Well, humans are not perfect. Okay. We're not robots yet. We might be in the future, but right now we're still very much so people, and we're very imperfect. And so people judge a book in the first 5 seconds. They look at you in the first 5 seconds and make a decision on who they think you are. Are you friendly? Are you not friendly? Are you arrogant? Are you not arrogant? Boom, done. The rest, the tone is set. And that's really unfortunate. So maybe it was nerves. Maybe the nerves got the best of her. And so she was really just stone cold, wasn't smiling. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there. But obviously it was a misconception. She went back to interview and did great and got in. Okay. But she was just baffled, and it just goes to show that this is not the only occurrence. There are plenty of students who have high GPAs who get turned away, and the lower GPA candidate gets selected instead. So don't be deterred if you have a lower GPA, but also be willing to do the work to show that you can do the work. Okay. All right. So ICU experience, how is this changing in the competitive realm of getting into CRNA school in 2024? A lot of people have now traveled or do have travel experience. And while I think that this is fine, it came kind of like almost the standard back during the pandemic. And it's kind of becoming what they originally thought, which is not really the preference. Why? Because you typically don't get the best, the sickest of the sickest patients, right? And this is kind of the barrier that most programs face when they think of travel experience. So you have to make sure that if you are traveling, that you can highlight your high acuity experience. Other things too, people I think have gotten kind of like, well, I'm burnt out in the ICU. I can't do it anymore. I got to leave. So they go to like the PACU or the OR or I don't know, another unit, cath lab. And they think because they have ICU experience in the past, they're going to be fine going into CRNA school. That's not always the case. The most competitive applicants are current in the ICU at the time that they apply and interview. And on top of that, there are some schools who make you sign a contract saying you're going to remain full-time in the ICU until you start the program. Now, not that you have to work up until the day before you start your anesthesia program. You can take a month off if you can financially, do it. 2 months off, do it. But for the most part, they don't want you just to get into school and then just leave, especially if your ICU experience is on the borderline of the requirement, meaning that year minimum, 2-year minimum. If you're barely meeting that requirement by the time you start school, they're going to expect you to stay to fully meet that requirement. Or if you don't want to risk that, because if you just leave and they find out and you went against that, you will be out so fast and you just blew that opportunity. So you don't want that to happen to you. I actually had one of our students who, he applied to CRNA school. He got an interview. He was shocked. He's like, no way, I got an interview. This is amazing. This is all back around the pandemic time. He was burnout, right? He was like, I'm tired of the ICU. I got an interview. I'm going to go. I think he went to the cath lab. Anyway, so he's at the cath lab. Well, when the interview, they asked him about his current ICU status and then essentially he was like, well, I'm in the cath lab. And they're like, well, why did you do that? Long story short, they liked him. They wanted to accept him, but it was contingent on him being able to get back into his original unit. It was a surgical ICU within 2 weeks, or his application would be voided and they'd pick the next applicant. 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks. Now, if he had completely left the SICU, he would have been in big trouble. But the reason he was able to go back and become full-time in this, because he kept it kind of a contingent position. So he kind of still moonlighted there on occasion. He was able to go back and get his full-time position and prove that he was full-time in the SICU, was able to keep his seat. But had he completely cut ties and left, what if there was not a job opening? And I mean, obviously during the pandemic, there probably was like 20 job openings for the SICU at that time, or at least in the MICU, there would have been plenty of respiratory ICUs from the joint. But all that being said, it was kind of a big eye-opening moment, like, just be careful. I'm not saying you can't leave the ICU, but make sure you're understanding what the requirements are of your program and making sure that they are aware that you want to leave the ICU, and just seek their counsel if that's okay for you to do. And you can be honest that maybe you need a mental break, that prior to starting CRNA school, what you need the most is to kind of get a break on the ICU. And if you already have that, 2 to 3 year experience, maybe it's not going to be as big of a deal for you to leave the ICU once you gain acceptance as it would be if you just had barely that year mark. So understand, again, these are great questions to ask during an open house, for example, to say, do you look poorly upon a candidate not being current in the ICU? Or do you allow an applicant who has gained acceptance to then transfer out of the ICU while they wait to start the program so they can get a little bit of a breather? Ask these questions, see what they have to say. You'll hear different answers from every program. I can guarantee you that. They all have a little bit different opinion on that. So I would make sure you're asking your programs how they feel. That's kind of my wording on the ICU experience, is to make sure that you are current in the ICU. This is always going to be the best possible scenario. So if you're unsure, remain current. I also had a story too that when I interviewed a previous CSPA student, she said that she was accepted on the spot, but her colleague was rejected essentially on the spot. And ultimately, the whole interview was going really well. And then they brought up a sore spot in her application, which is, why are you the only applicant we're interviewing who's not current in ICU? Why should we let you in? And they had no rebuttal for that. They they were like speechless. They didn't really know what to say. And let's just say it went downhill from there. And they didn't get into school. So that kind of stinks. That was like the one pitfall in their application. So don't let that be you. Be current in ICU if you can tolerate it, just enough to get into CRNA school, and then ask if you're able to transfer units at that time, if they are okay with that. Okay, leadership. Everyone seems to be able, everyone can have some type of leadership, but here's the difference between leadership role that actually is meaningful is, what did you actually do? What are you doing? Because to join a committee to check a box, but never go to the meetings, never really do anything, but I'm a part of the committee, it's going to be very apparent when they ask you about it, you have really nothing to say, versus an applicant who is a part of a committee, but has led a research project or is actively doing surveys on their unit and trying to make positive changes for whatever it may be. So make sure that if you're joining a committee, any kind of, leadership quote unquote program, that you're actually doing something, that you're not just joining it for a resume checkbox booster. Make sure you actually have something meaningful that you're doing to contribute to that leadership role. And of course, it could be things like precepting and charge nurse. Those are both leadership roles that obviously are very, but then what is it about being a preceptor that makes you more equipped to become a CRNA? That might be a question. Same with being a charge nurse. What is it about being a charge nurse that makes you more equipped and more able to be successful in CRNA school? Like, think about those things, because if you have those leadership roles, you should always be thinking, how's this going to help me? Okay. Because they're going to be wondering what you think, and your answer could be very insightful for them as far as what are you getting out of that experience that's actually going to help you. All right. And lastly, as far as how competitive CRNA schools in 2024, I already spoke about how many applicants they get. And we kind of went over some of the big hitters like GPA and ICU experience and leadership roles. But lastly, it's your interview. And you can do everything right. Perfect. You've crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's. And you're like, my application is gold. I'm going to throw this in their desk and they're going to be like, woo, come here. But you could get to your interview and that balloon could just pop in your face. Like I spoke to before. I've heard so many crazy stories. Sometimes it's what the outfit you wear. Something as silly as your outfit. Maybe you come with a giant Prada bag that's like half your face, and you have to like balloon over your bling bling jewelry, and they're just like, whoa, that's quite a statement piece. Just be professional. Don't wear, it's not a time to be wearing, the latest trends, just wear a normal blazer, a high cut shirt, ladies, men, make sure your hair is brushed, that you've shaved, just things like that go a long way. Make sure you look like you're there. Not that you just roll out of bed and you didn't tuck in your shirt or, whatever it may be. Just make sure you put in the effort to show that you're there. Don't wear jeans. Wear a suit. Don't even wear khakis. Wear a suit. This is the time to get a suit. You'll need that suit when you interview for a job in the future anyway. So just buy a suit. This is the time to wear it. So, stuff like that, and making sure you're practicing self-awareness. If you're someone like me, who uses her hands when she talks. I'm like, and not to mention, I also can talk really fast, especially when I'm nervous. Sometimes that can play in my favor because I can just let it all out there and I'm very easy and can kind of just go with the flow conversation. Other times I can kind of bite off more than I should and I say more than I should. And if that's you, you have to be aware of that so you can just have some quiet space before you keep digging yourself a hole. I did dig myself a hole in an interview, my very first interview. It went pretty poorly. It was a learning experience. I couldn't come out of that. And, I learned from that and went in the next time knowing that I need to be more careful and be more thoughtful too about what I would say in certain situations and what I wouldn't say. But be careful with, it's okay to use your hands and stuff, but if you're just like flying it in their face and it could come off as you're overly dramatic or, oh my gosh, I don't know if we could handle her. She's really intense. But it's equally okay because it shows you're engaged. It shows that you're, being thoughtful. And it also equally, when you use your hands to speak, it just creates more energy and it also creates more eye contact and relatability to the person who's answering the question but just be careful because it's equally okay just to take your busy hands before throwing them in someone's face and being all animated and just put them, fold them, and fold them. And if you have to twiddle your thumbs, you can twiddle your thumbs. But sometimes it's just nice before you get too crazy and animated to just take your hands and cross them and that's what I would do. If I was in an interview, I mean, I know I'm using my hands now because I'm on a casual podcast and it's my podcast. So I can do what I want. I can throw my hands in your face all the time if I want to. But if I was in a professional interview, I would take my hands and I would fold them because I know if I didn't, I would use them. And I'm not saying on occasion I might unfold them and use my one hand to kind of, create some movement in my voice and my tone, but I would then recross my hands after I explained the answer to make sure I'm not getting too in their face with my hands. So again, this is all about awareness and practicing your interview is really key. Practice. Brush up on your clinical based knowledge, your EI kind of situational awareness kind of questions. And you may think, okay, well, my school's not going to ask me a single interview or clinical style question because I've heard historically they don't. That's great that you know that they historically don't ask clinical questions, but you never know. You never know. And these schools know these students talk. They all know. In fact, I know there are the majority of interview panels will switch up the interview in the middle of interview season because they know candidates talk to other candidates and they don't want all of their questions being spewed to every other candidate coming in and having them have an unfair advantage, right? They know all the questions we're going to ask. So they typically have a very large bank and anything's fair game. They do tend to have favorites. I will say that they do tend to have favorite questions, but they do tend to mix it up at the same time to make sure that, again, not one person's coming in with an unfair advantage because they know all the questions and they've been able to prepare the night before. So be prepared for really anything. And then on top of that, I also know when program directors change or really any faculty member or the admission panel, I mean, some they bring in different people sometimes every year for these admission panels. They have different questions. And so you might have been tipped off from the year before, your friend who got in, and maybe when you go in, they don't ask you anything the same. You're like, well, I wasn't ready for that. Well, you shouldn't expect to be. The whole point of practicing interview questions is not to know the exact question you're going to be asked, but just to practice the intention behind it. Brush up on your critical care knowledge, know your ACLS, practice your EI questions and situational awareness questions, practice the STAR method, which is situation, task. STAR? So situation, task, action, and result. If you practice telling a story with the STAR method, you tend to be able to create a whole picture versus, when you're nervous, you might only tell little bits and pieces of the story. And in your mind, you're like, it makes sense because you were there. So the story, it has a finish and has a start and has a result. But if you're not clear on telling that story, the person who's never been involved in the situation is going to be like, not really going to make any sense. You left a bunch of holes. I have no idea. So practicing telling a story even is important. So practice. Don't wait till you get asked the interview. Practice. If you plan on applying to CRNA school, you should begin practicing your interview skills. It should not wait. It really should be mixed in between working on your essay and resume. You should also equally be preparing for your interview that early. I'm pretty sure I prepared for 6 months and I still failed. And then I practiced a few more months and I interviewed again. And then I was successful. But all in all, it was like 9 months of practicing and preparing for my interview. And that was before the day of really having options like TeachRN, you can go buy a mock interview. I was just practicing in the mirror. I was doing it in front of my husband. I don't think my phone even recorded back then, so I couldn't record myself. But you can come on Zoom, get a free Zoom account, and go record yourself asking yourself questions, and then check to see how much eye contact you're making, especially if you're going to be doing a virtual interview. And I also want to preferences with, if you have the option to go in person, please go in person. You don't want a virtual interview if you don't have to have one. If there's a situation that doesn't make it possible for you to go in person, okay, you will always do better in person. And it's just more personable. They're going to be able to connect with you better in person than they could online. And it's really not fair to you as a virtual applicant to do one on the screen, in my opinion, and then have other in-person interviews. Because I personally think as a human, you're going to make deeper and better connections in person with someone than you would on the Zoom call. So you're kind of doing yourself a disservice by even being on Zoom anymore. If you have the option, I would always pick to go in person. All right. Last, I want to make sure you guys know about the freebie that's down in the show notes. It's 10 clinical style questions with answers. You can grab that freebie. There's also going to be a link to a paid resource. It is 88 clinical style questions with rationale/answers. And again, I'm going to link to you guys can purchase that. It's just $27.99 if you want to purchase that full guide. Otherwise, enjoy the freebie. It's 10 questions that I feel would really help you get a good start on preparing for your interviews, and best of luck, and cheers till next time. All right. Bye-bye.
Hey, future CRNA, as always, I appreciate you and your loyalty. Thank you so very much for tuning in this week. I'd love to hear from you, so screenshot this episode and share it to your IG stories with your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to tag me at CRNA School Prep Academy so I can personally thank you. Be sure to head over to CRNASchoolPrepAcademy.com to check out our blog and gather free resources to help you along your CRNA journey. Stay strong, and I'll see you next week.